Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm Day Darling, as you see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhollow today on another swelteringly hot day here in the UK. Ooh, getting into the summer months now. I don't know what this weird voice I'm doing is, but anyway, what should we talk about? I'm not really sure what to talk about. You know what I can talk about is actually because I watched a Tom Scott video. Whoa, Tom Scott video, crazy. You know who's that? No, of course. You might not know who Tom Scott is. He's sort of like an educational YouTuber. Well, I mean, if I say educational, it makes you think of like Khan Academy style videos. That's not quite the case, but he does do things like informative, I suppose, videos, and often about strange or unusual things in the world, and you know, it's quite an entertaining watch. Hello everyone, right now in Fawnhallow it's 3:19 PM on Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, and we've got Label visiting. Of course, we know that because we saw her. So yeah, well, okay, he's not like a stand-up comedian type of comedy or anything like that, but he's just very informative. I think it's interesting to see, you know, how he breaks things down, I suppose, in a very sort of informed and well-researched way. So he does a lot of cool things. Honestly, I feel like he's kind of living the dream a little bit, you know. he's basically getting people like emailing him being like, hey, do you want to try this crazy thing out? And then he's like, yeah, of course I want to check it out. And then, you know, you check it out and it's like, whoa, this is awesome. Or not awesome, as the case may be. Honestly, sounds like a supremely fun time. But anyway, he's worked hard to be where he is, so fair enough. No, anyway, the point is, he's got a main channel with Tom Scott. I mean, he's got a secondary channel called like Tom Scott 2 or something, I don't remember. No, Tom Scott Plus, there we go. Which, you know, I knew about, but only sort of vaguely, well, and never actually watched any videos on it. And I was looking through some of his videos because they were very interesting, you know. He had one about caving, and I was like, that looks fun. But then he had one a couple of days, not a couple of days ago, maybe it was like a couple of months ago or something, where he was like, I'm definitely afraid of roller coasters. Here's me learning to get over, learning to conquer that phobia. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, you know. And especially because I clicked on it because I recognised the roller coaster in the thumbnail. I was like, that is Nemesis from Alton Towers. That's something I've been on quite a few times, despite the fact I've only been to Alton Towers a handful of times, I'm going to be honest. If you don't know what Alton Towers is, it's basically the biggest, well, maybe not the biggest, but there's basically quite a few big theme parks in the UK. We've got Alton Towers, which is sort of like, I'd say the more adult one. Like, you need to be quite a lot taller to ride most of those rides. A lot of the rides are much more intense because they've got things like Smiler, they've got things like Oblivion, etc, etc, etc. I didn't mean to go to someone's island. We got Fort Park, which is not bad, but that's sort of like a medium level. I put it at like a teen level, you know. Maybe not teen level, but it's got some good ones because it's got Nemesis 2, which is a fantastic ride in Fort Park. It's also got Colossus, which is a fantastic ride. So, and I don't mean to disparage Fort Park, but Fort Park tends to have a bigger spread of less like grand scale roller coasters and more like some good grand scale roller coasters and some like smaller things as well, which is a bit more accessible. So it's like a good sort of stepping up. It's got a good range, I suppose, is what I mean to say. But then you got Chasing in the Wild of Adventures, which is sort of like it's definitely like a step below of intensity from Fort Park. They have a Dragon's Fury, which is probably the most intense ride they have, which is mostly intense because it's absolutely nauseating to go on in a certain sense, because it's basically like, you know, those teacup rides, but like that on a roller coaster track, because you spin around like crazy and you're meant to like grab you just spin, and you're meant to like, I remember there's even signs in the queue where you sort of go, while you're queuing up for them, then being like, oh, if you want to have a maximum spinach, you put the two heaviest people on one side and the two lightest people on one side. Obviously that's, you know, trying to be like, oh, if you know you're a child with a sibling going with your parents or something, this is how you should distribute it, of course. So that's what we did. But it's a very dizzying ride. I mean, they have something called Vampire, which is basically sort of like a Nemesis light, is what I'd call it. It's a hanging coaster. If you don't know what hanging coasters are, basically instead of sitting down like within a usual roller coaster car, you'll be hanging from the rail, I suppose, like imagine you're like an office chair, and like a ski lift. It's basically a really, really intense ski lift sort of thing, and probably more strapped in. And you can Google it yourself if you are also curious. And then you also have Legoland, which is, you know, Legoland is basically just to promote Lego. It's mainly for like anyone from, you know, literal like babies and toddlers all the way up to like, you know, I mean, you can have fun as a teenager, and you know, I've been when I was a teenager, so okay. It was certainly not very intense and not particularly interesting, is what I'd say. Oh man, I just got like a weird memory where I went to it. Like, one of my friend's birthdays, like he took us to Legoland, because I mean, he was the sort of friend where, you know, he liked to be a little bit quirky and that sort of thing. It was just it's a weird memory. Now I'm looking back at it. almost a little bit cringy in certain aspects, but, you know, cringy on my behalf, not cringy on his behalf. But, you know, I was also like 12, so, you know, what do I know? Anyway, so, yeah, but those are like the 4 major theme parks, I think, in the UK. But there's probably others, but I can't really think of them off the top of my head. Those are ones I know, because they're like, well, they're not all covered by Merlin Pass, but they're the major ones. Anyway, so Tom Scott went to Alton Towers, which is basically the most intense theme park, I think, out of all of them, personally. Alton Towers, I've been to a handful of times. Like, I've been, I think, about 3 times. 3 or 4 times. Twice when I was much, much younger, and once when I was, like, about a teenager or so. But by much, much younger, I mean like a preteen, so it's not really that much younger than once when I was about a teenager. And then once I went recently, I think earlier this year, actually, I went with some of my friends. So I've ridden on basically every ride in Alton Towers. Not literally every ride, because most of the riding I did when I was a preteen or a teen. I didn't really... I came here because I was like, I need some more bells. Most of the rides... when I was a preteen to teen. The rides I didn't ride on were ones which were constructed after I was a preteen, but had opportunities to ride on earlier this year. But I didn't go on most of them, mainly because I was with... I talked about it, like, such a camping trip, like, back in March, those Animal Crossing videos. Basically, I'm with my friends. None of my friends really love roller coasters. I'm the only one... Well, and, sorry, I have a friend circle I went with. I'm basically the only one who really does, and I was, you know, sort of weighed up in my head. I was like, I'll go on rides if there's literally no queue, but... On the whole, I've ridden basically all of these rides. It's not very important to me. I'd rather, you know, spend time with my friends and go on rides that they are more comfortable with rather than not. And plus, they just sort of wanted to test themselves to see what their own personal limits were, what they were comfortable with. They all found it perfectly fine, you know. And you might be like, is it a little bit disappointing? I suppose in some ways it is a little bit disappointing, but also it's not in other ways, because, you know, I'm just very glad I have my friends and had such an enjoyable time with them, despite the fact that, you know, we didn't really go on many of the intense roller coasters. But I would like to go back to Alton Towers on one day, you know, on a day when it's particularly empty or whatever, just so I can go on like a whole spree riding on all the roller coasters. Anyway, that's what Tom Scott basically had. He had a fantastic opportunity, obviously being, you know, a big influencer in YouTube sphere. He gets these opportunities. He was allowed to go basically on Alton Towers. I assume it was a day where it was closed for like maintenance or something, or like half a morning was closed. I don't really know. I didn't really look into the details, but he was there at daytime and it was empty and it was just him. And I would be like, wow, that's like my dream. Well, not my dream, but that'd be awesome. So I was taking a sip of water. It's very hot right now. And credit to him, he is very aware of the fact, being like, this is such an honor and a privilege, and but, you know, he's obviously someone who's like really scared of roller coasters. So obviously it's quite a scary and intimidating moment for him, which I sympathise with is probably a better word. I can't really empathise because I'm not scared of roller coasters, but I sympathise because it does look quite stressful. And it was interesting to watch that video, I suppose, in the first place, and come at it from my perspective of someone, you know, I'm like, I see a scary roller coaster, or what would be conventionally scary, I'm like, yes, let's do it. As long as it's up to code, I'm all for it. If it's not up to code, I'm not an idiot. I'm not riding on it. No matter how much I like the thrills and spittles I suppose you have in roller coasters, I'm not willing to risk serious injury to myself. Or others for that matter. So, yes. But roller coasters are actually incredibly safe, aren't they? Because they've been checked, they've been double checked, triple checked, over and over and over again. They do like practice runs every single day, with like dummies and like empty dry runs where there's nobody on it. They're engineered, so often probably like calculated to like, not pixel perfect, but like within like tiny percentages of precision, just to make sure that's how it works. And they're specifically engineered just to give you maximum terror while, you know, not actually putting you in any danger whatsoever. And they got like fail-safes on fail-safes just to make sure things don't go catastrophically wrong. Of course, you know, accidents do happen, but they are, you know, don't happen all that often, not enough to be scared of. And certainly, you know, if you're comfortable, I suppose, with driving a car on a motorway, then you know, I think the rates are probably a lot lower than riding on a roller coaster. The scary part is the actual, you know, terror of the actual experience itself. So it was actually kind of like fascinating, and I don't want to say fascinating because it sounds really macabre, I suppose, when I say like, oh, you know, Tom Scott was in utter terror. Look how interesting it was to see him like quiver and shake and all that sort of thing. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not what I mean. I mean, it was more interesting because Tom Scott is, of course, very articulate, and he talks through like exactly what he's feeling. You know, like, oh, you know, bit of a nausea. I know, it's just that, like, fear. There's no literal, like, biological reaction going on. He's very sort of, like, articulate and very sort of logical, I suppose, with systematic, I suppose, of how he's describing experiences. And it was really interesting, I think, from an outside perspective, being like, oh, so this is what it's like if you are, like, scared of roller coasters, that sort of thing. And because it's a conversation I have with my friends before. Like, one of my friends I talked with, and he's like, he doesn't like roller coasters because it makes him feel nauseous. He gets like that, you know, as I understand, it's like a heavy feeling in your stomach which makes you want to throw up. And I'm like, huh, weird, I don't get that feeling. I get feelings in my stomach where it sort of, it feels, instead of feeling like nausea, it feels like excitement, I suppose, like a sort of like a tingling sensation, which might just be, you know, that sort of butterflies in the stomach sensation is interpreted differently by our brains. Like, his becomes much more nausea, while mine becomes sort of like a fight or flight response. But for me, it sort of just becomes like an adrenaline rush. I don't really know. Like, I'm not a biologist, so, you know, of course, all the theories I'm sort of spitting out are sort of nonsensical and not backed by anything. But it's really interesting, and it was interesting to see Tom Scott's perspective, especially because I have such a fresh memory of Alton Towers that I, you know, was watching the rides he rode on, and I was like, I actually rode on all those rides last time I went. Like, first one he went on was the Runaway minecart, and I rode it with 3 of my friends. One of my friends was like completely fine with it, the other friend was like, that's fine as well, and the other friend was like, that's basically the limit of what I ever want to do as a roller coaster. And seeing it from Tom Scott's perspective, where it was basically the same thing, he was like, that's basically my limit. And, you know, and to be fair to Tom Scott, he's like, I want to overcome this phobia, so he, you know, pushes himself further and further. And you might, you know, like, interject now, be like, oh, what, are you trying to criticise your friends for not pushing themselves even further? No, that's not what I mean. Everyone's got, you know, fears and weaknesses, phobias, etc., and understanding your own limits, I think, is a smart and healthy thing to do even understand them. And I give a lot of props to my friend for even, like, pushing and trying to find those limits in the first place. And, you know, they found that limit, were like, I'm no longer comfortable past this, I'm okay with just drawing it here, and that's perfectly fine. And it's also fine to be like, I want to see how much further I can push a line, to see if this line is really something I want to contend with, because there are fears definitely you should try and overcome if there's something which, like, cripples the way you live. Like, if you have, like, a fear of, I can't think of a good fear, like, like a debilitating fear of eating vegetables or something, I don't know, and that sort of really gets in the way of your healthy diet, you know, there you'd probably, you know, encourage people to be like, you should probably try and work through that, because that seems like something which would really negatively impact your way of living. But things like roller coasters, it's not like a high priority to overcome your fear of roller coasters. It's not like someone's going to come up to you and be like, oh, ride this roller coaster or you're going to die. That's, you know, a little bit ridiculous in the first place, and you don't really casually run into roller coasters. So honestly, if you've got a fear of roller coasters, not a bad fear to have, because you so rarely run into them in the first place, and every time you do run into them, it is definitively by choice a lot of the time. Like, it's a very strange thing, I think, to force someone to go on a roller coaster, and I don't want to, you know, become a person who forces people into uncomfortable positions that they don't want to do, for example, like roller coasters. So yes, I'm not trying to disrespect my friends. They've done a fantastic job. I mean, the entire thing was basically just trying to see what their limits were. They found their limits, and they were like, that's it. And I was like, fair enough. And, you know, it's something where we could all be happy in the end, because, you know, I talked about it, we went on the in the night garden ride instead, where I found it very strange, because amusingly, I don't think I've been on those rides even when I was super young. Like, I started riding on roller coasters from quite young age, which is probably explains why I don't have such a fear. Or maybe it's sort of like a hand-in-hand thing. I wasn't that scared of them when I was younger, so I rode on them, and thus it sort of like feeds into themselves of me not developing a lack of fear for them, I suppose, in the first place. Like, and I know when I was super young, like, I can remember things like going on the banana boat ride in is that in Fort Park? I think that's in Fort Park. Was one of my favourite rides, and that's, you know, nowadays I look back and I'd be like, oh, that's quite a, you know, small ride, but obviously even not to everyone. Even though I was quite young, and I still wanted to ride it. And I remember when I was super young wanting to ride on, like, Colossus and Nemesis and all these sort of things, but, you know, I wasn't tall enough to actually ride on them. Like, one thing I super remember wanting to ride on was I wanted to ride on Detonator, which is one of those rides which, like, you go all the way up and then it just drops you from the top. And I wanted to ride on it, but I was not tall enough to ride on it at the time. I think it had to be 1.3 meters to ride on it at the time, and I just wasn't tall enough, and I remember I got very disappointed about that sort of thing. But I'm sure there was a time where I probably did ride on those rides. I just don't really remember them off to my head. Probably maybe when I went to Legoland, that sort of thing. But I thought it was an interesting experience anyway, because, you know, now it's sort of, you know, despite the fact it might not necessarily be the first time I rode on those sort of very child-friendly rides, it was the first time I'd like properly remembered them. So at the time I was riding it, I was like, this is very strange. This feels like a very weird experience of me being here. But my friends are having a good time, and in retrospect, I had a good time as well, you know. To see my friends being happy and, you know, finding something that they were comfortable with is something always to celebrate, I think. Anyway, so Tom Scott's video, you should go watch it. It's actually very interesting. Whether you're scared of roller coasters yourself and you're wanting to push your limits, and, you know, hopefully seeing Tom Scott, you know, push through his own like phobias and limits in a certain way is also, you know, inspiring. Or, you know, for someone like me who isn't afraid of roller coasters, it's fascinating to watch, you know, from, I suppose, a different perspective, of one which you aren't so familiar with. So he runs a runaway minecart. I remember riding a last time I went to Austin Towers. In my eyes, obviously, it was just sort of just like a warm-up roller coaster. I mean, it wasn't really a roller coaster in my eyes, but, you know, I still had fun with it. And I remember riding with my friends. He was utterly terrified by it, which is fair enough, because he doesn't like roller coasters, and it makes him feel nauseous. Like, why wouldn't he be? It'd be strange if he wasn't, I suppose. Oh, hello, Apollo. You sure snuck back quickly, didn't you? But then he rode on the next one, which is another one I actually rode. Like, I didn't ride on that many roller coasters while I was there in Austin Towers, because I didn't want to wait through half-an-hour queues and just sort of make my friends wait around. Which, but to be fair, they were completely fine with. They were like, hey dear darling, if you want to ride on rides, you should absolutely just go on there. We're totally fine with just chilling here. And I'm like, I do like want to ride on rides, but more importantly, I'd rather, you know, hang out with you lot. I've been on all these rides before. The only one I haven't been on, which maybe I should have gone on, but I was like, the queue was so long that I didn't want to really do it, was Smiler, because that's one which was constructed after I had actually you know, in between that time where I hadn't gone to Austin Towers. So in retrospect, I probably should have gone on that one. I should have gone on it near the end of the day when the queue was getting like super short, so they just had to wait for like 20 minutes or something. But I didn't. I don't know why. You know, I don't blame myself. Like, you know, hang out. My friends are great. why wouldn't I want to hang out with them? But yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, so he rode on the Wicker Man, which is the next one. I absolutely love a Wicker Man. That was another one of the new ones I rode on, and my friends was being like, I'm willing to try this one because it doesn't have any loops and inversions. I believe it's just a wooden coaster, but it's basically runaway minecart, but a bit more intense. The queue out one was so long. It was like an hour, and I was like, oh my god. So long, but it was super fun. It was the first time I rode on it. I had a great time. My friend who what's the word? I don't know. I never know how you say this word. Vehemently dislikes roller coasters. Stood on the sidelines trying to record us, and, you know, I basically like seeked him out and waved to him as we sort of passed him on roller coaster. It was great fun. I thought I loved it. And its thematics are pretty cool. And then seeing Tom Scott go through that, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. You know, good on you, Tom Scott. You know, I suppose if anything, I was sort of like cheering from the sidelines. We were like, yeah, you go, Tom Scott. And then the next one he rode on was Nemesis, which is the one in the thumbnail art. And I was like, whoa, that's like a big jump up from Wicker Man to Nemesis, I think. Because that's going from something with, like, no inversions, basically just like a fast sort of up and down thing, to something with tons. I think it's got like 5 inversions. It's a completely different type of roller coaster. It's hanging, like, your feet aren't even on the ground, which I would have thought is a huge jump up. But I don't know. He obviously talked to the people who, you know, in the park in North Towers, and that was what they probably agreed on to be like a good sort of step-by-step process, I suppose. I would have imagined there's another, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called like Corkscrew or something. The one next to Rita Queen of Speed would probably have been a better like step up, because that's basically, it's like Wicker Man, except for it's got like a couple of inversions in there, which, you know, might be a better step up. But I don't know. I guess Nemesis is much more of an iconic one. So that ended up being one he ran on, and, you know, he was terrified, but, you know, he persevered and just went, right, let's do it. And he just did it. And it was like, whoa, you know. Sort of like jumping out of my seat metaphorically, going like, yeah, he did it. Anyway, that's actually one of the ones I rode on recently, last time I went to Austin Towers. Great fun, can I say? It was just good old fun. There's not much else to say. The only reason I went on that one is because the queue was literally like 2 minutes. So I just walked in, got on the ride, and then immediately like got out again. So that's why I was okay with riding on that one. But yeah, but Alton Towers is a ton of fantastic rides. Like Oblivion, Oblivion's not my favourite, but it's really cool the first time you ride on it, because it's like such an iconic sort of like iconic thing. Which, if you don't know, it's kind of like Stealth in Thorpe Park, where basically it goes up. Well, it actually doesn't go up, but it goes up like quite like slowly when it comes to basically a huge drop. But the drop is not just a vertical drop down; it's a vertical drop which actually can like comes inwards. It's like concave and then goes immediately down. So imagine like a P shape, that sort of thing. Like it goes around the P's curve and then drops down. Obviously not like a massive curve or anything. It's quite small, otherwise, you know, it would be quite dangerous, I'd imagine. But it's sort of like it baits you into being an inversion, but it's not. But the biggest thing about Oblivion, one, is a massive drop down, but two, as you're going around the P curve, it like stops, like just before it goes over the P curve. So then you're just like hanging there, like staring down into the sort of black abyss, which drops you down into, because that vertical drop goes like down underneath the ground, and it's super cool. And it sort of goes like, starts slowly going over, like in a moment where everyone expects to like and go whoosh, but it goes and it just stops, and it hangs there for about 5 seconds, and everyone's just sort of like sitting there going because it's super spooky, and then it drops you. It's always good fun. And what was an interesting thing, actually, was the association, I thought. An interesting from a Tom Scott video, which I found fascinating, was the association he had with the sound of the roller coasters, bringing up, like, spiking his, I suppose, anxiety towards him at the same time. Because, well, to me, like, obviously, as someone who does like roller coasters, the sound of, like, the clattering of roller coasters, it's not like music to my ears or anything, but it's sort of just like, ooh, you know, thrilling, I suppose. It's like anticipation building. But to him, it was like, even the sound of, like, the carts coming in and screeching to a halt was, like, a sickening, like, shot of dread, I suppose, towards him. And I was like, oh, you know what? I never even considered the fact that, I never even considered the fact that the sound itself was just like the metal sort of like creaking, and like, you know, the normal sound of like friction between like the wheels and the rails would be something that would induce fear. And I'm like, obviously in retrospect that makes a ton of sense, but like why wouldn't it? it's you know, if it's something, a sound distinctly from something. I don't particularly want to buy anything. Wait, can we buy your clothes so you don't wear them anymore? How does that work? Sure. Is this how it works? Does that mean you never, Oh, I should have done a Western shirt, because that doesn't even make sense. I never realised if that's how it works. If me buying that polo shirt means that Raymond never wears it anymore. I don't actually know. Fascinating, isn't it? But yeah, I don't know, that's one thing that struck me as particularly fascinating, was his response to like the sort of the cars like creaking into a stop at like the actual station. Like his expression changes and he goes, hate that sound. You know, it like, obviously I don't really think much about that sound in the first place, but obviously to me, you know, it's not a sound that induces fear. It just never occurred to me that it would induce fear, I suppose, like that. But the more I think about it, I'm just like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, why wouldn't it? It's crazy how strongly brains can associate things with each other. You know, I'm sure I have my own things, which if I hear the sound of, like, make my like sort of hair stand on end. I'm not sure what they'd be. I don't like the sound of like electricity, like static electricity, because I'm not sure if I talked about this before. I really dislike getting static shocks. At least I dislike the feeling. So I dislike the feeling. Well, I was going to say I'm getting electrocuted, but electrocuted like kind of insinuates that you like die. But it's the sort of thing where I don't really like that feeling in the first place. I hate the feeling of like static shocks when I touch things, you know. And I don't know how exactly it came about at some point, but you know, maybe that's my roller coaster fear. But it's not really like a roller coaster fear, because obviously he's having a very visceral reaction to these roller coasters, and so much so that like he's constantly being like, I don't want this to do this. Like, I don't think I'd ever choose to be like, get static shock or anything, but it was just like, oh, get static shock and you get £100, I'd be like, yep, alright, tase me. I don't mind. Like, I don't like it, but, you know, it's not debilitating, I suppose, in that sense. It's not well, I don't want to call it like irrational, because that's like phobias out there, like irrational hatreds and fears, aren't they, in the first place? I guess it kind of is irrational for like static shocks, you know, like when you sit down in a car and you come out of a car and you like go to slam the car door and when you get static shock, I'm just like, ah. I think how I describe it is that irritates me more than it does the average person. It was also my thing with like cleanliness and all that, but again, that's actually something I've like actively worked on, so it's not really debilitating anymore. I can't really think of what else. But I mean, I guess that would be more of a smell thing rather than a sound thing. But smells, you know, certainly do affect me. I think more than bad smells of things like rubbish, of like sewage, etc. I think probably affect me more than the average person. But other smells don't necessarily. Like things like smoke, like oil smells and that sort of thing don't really affect me. But things which like smell dirty, they certainly do. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I'm sort of just walking around collecting weeds because I can't be bothered to do any more my mission. So I suppose I'll sort of round us off anywhere. Round us off here. So yeah, Tom Scott's fear of roller coasters and him overcoming it. Awesome. Good on you, Tom Scott. And, you know, hopefully someday I'll be able to have an opportunity to be able to go to Alton Towers before everything's open and ride on them. No queues on Alton Towers. How does that sound? Oh, dreamy. Anyway, I'm going to round off this episode here. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Any likes, comments, subscriptions, shares are greatly appreciated. Join me, Dear Darling, Discord. Follow me on Twitter down below. Hope we can see each other again. But for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.